This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We're grateful to have you here with us on an important episode of Real Talk as we sort of analyze and better understand the impact of Liberation Day, Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs, as he's framing them, impacting global trade already. Markets are down, and of course, politicians stateside and around the world speaking out about this, including Mark Carney, who stepped back into prime minister mode, taking time away from the campaign trail on the 2nd of April. And today he'll be speaking, as we're talking to you, on April 3rd with Canadian premiers from the provinces and territories about Canada's approach to all of this. In this episode of the show, we're going to get analysis on the political front from Sharan Kaur. She'll join us in just a moment. We'll get the economics of it all and what this means in particular for Canadians. Canada, for the most part, along with Mexico, exempted from the big announcements on the 2nd of April. But of course, other import tariffs remain on a lot of the big industries, steel and aluminum, auto parts, that 25% tariff on all automobiles manufactured outside of the United States, obviously going to impact American consumers more than anything. And on the back half of this episode, we're grateful that she's agreed to talk to us today. Just a few days ago, Rachel Gilmore learned that she was being let go as CTV's national election fact checker amid political pressure from Pierre Poilievre's team. Rachel's going to take us behind the curtain of that story and let us know how that all came together. We teed it up yesterday, but you'll hear it straight from the source in this episode of the show, which is being made possible with the presenting sponsorship of Business Career College, and in particular, their Certified Digital Asset Advisor designation. This is a heads up, a fantastic, what do you want to call it? Like a career level up for financial planners, financial advisors that are going to be working with millennials, Gen Z at any point. You know, those next generation of investors telling pollsters, 3/4 of them, that they're interested in incorporating decentralized finance into their asset portfolio. That means that you need to better understand and be able to advise on fundamental changes in the financial landscape, including crypto assets. And in comes businesscareercollege.com. They've been leaders in the financial training space online since the late 1990s. And this is no difference. This new CDAA designation, Certified Digital Asset Advisor, will help you get up to speed on Bitcoin and the blockchain. You'll better understand wallets, Ethereum, decentralized finance, and the like, wallets, custody, and exchanges. If all of this means nothing to you now, then, well, the CDAA, a perfect fit. You can sign up, learn more at businesscareercollege.com. Make sure you use the promo code RYAN20. That's all one word, RYAN20, to knock 20% off the cost of that investment at businesscareercollege.com. Well, on Liberation Day, the American president unveiling sweeping tariffs aimed at recalibrating America's trade relationships. So says the president, the universal 10% tariff imposed on all imports. Those will kick in, the majority of them just a couple of days from when we're doing this episode on the 5th of April. And then some country-specific tariffs, like 34% on Chinese goods or 20% on goods out of the EU, effective a week after being announced. The president himself, Donald Trump, says the measure is designed to address trade imbalances and bolster domestic manufacturing. Now, if you're listening from Canada, or if you happen to be listening from Mexico, lucky you, you likely know that these are these two nations, for the most part, John, exempt from Trump's tariff announcement.
Yeah.
The exemption spares key Canadian industries.
We still got the auto and the seal stuff. And
Big stuff.
There is you can't take everything Trump's promises, verbatim and, act like he's going to do it. But apparently, if, the fentanyl and border stuff improves, that'll go down to 12%, he says.
And what's the metric, by the way, for measuring whether or not the border situation is improving with fentanyl? And does anybody actually believe that the information that they're getting proves that the Canada to U.S. fentanyl issue is bigger than the U.S. to Canada issues?
And let me just say, your friend, Jason Kenney, even in an interview yesterday, his tweets are going wild right now. I find myself watching Jason Kenney's X again, which is crazy. But I think his line from his interview yesterday, which everyone is playing, is going to be our tagline for the next month or until the election is over. Fasten your seatbelts.
Fasten your seatbelts.
And look at those markets today, Ryan. Already NASDAQ down 4%. Everything's just down this morning.
We'll take a look at all of that, and in particular, Doug Griffiths will get into kind of the money stuff for us, and just basically what it means for the economy, what it means for industry, what it means for entrepreneurs. You figure that this is a slow pace. Let's in the first 2 minutes of the show quickly just get off on a tangent very quickly.
Okay.
Some folks are wondering if Jason Kenney is already beginning his soft campaign for the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada.
There's something going on. He's doing a push on social.
Or maybe he just like when you're someone like Kenney, who's been a senior cabinet minister. Obviously, he's held very high profiles under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Maybe it's just whether or not you have aspirations to return to the party as the federal leader. Maybe it's just hard to stay out of this kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
People in the chat are loving how I referred to him as your friend, Jason.
Yeah,
Kenney.
I thought you were having some fun with that. At one point he was. But
you want to get to Trump?
Well, let's just say, I mean, the global impact of these tariffs is what I think the majority of commentary is focusing on right now, unless it's out of the United States. And we'll bring you some American media because obviously this is probably most relevant to American consumers in particular.
Yeah, they're the ones
those
that are going to get hit.
Voted for Donald Trump because they were having a hard time affording their housing and their groceries. But given Canada's deep integration with international markets, it'll obviously have indirect effects on Canada's economy too. So Canada finds itself in a complex position, and we're going to hear from the Prime Minister and obviously meeting with the premiers today. While the country exempt from this 10% universal import tariff and additional country-specific levies, existing tariffs linked to the concerns, like you said, Johnny, around fentanyl trafficking and migration do remain in effect, and those include a 25% duty on certain Canadian goods. Why don't we get to here's a quick portion of what Donald Trump, I think everyone's been hearing from Donald Trump ever since his announcement with the big charts and the graphs. You can picture that. I love how he was taking everybody behind the scenes, right? He's like, it's a windy day. I had a bunch of big signs. We didn't want to blow it over. That's the last thing you want if you're in charge of optics and you're rolling out an announcement like this. You don't want all the signs blowing off of the easels.
No, but it reminded me of those guys who stand outside of stores and like spin the sales signs. Like he's got this big visual. It's just so funny. Barudi's in the chat today. Erica says Jason Kenney's ex is amazing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica Baruti is, of course, co-host of The Discourse. We'll have to get her and Cheryl back on to get their take on all of this. But here's POTUS.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
Can't get any simpler than that.
Wow.
So what has Mark Carney said about this? Well, basically he's responded assertively, I guess.
Sure.
Whatever happened to the tweet where they had this wonderfully productive and they were like best buddies and it was going to be Mark Carney and Donald Trump and they were going to be, talking about, how both countries could benefit in marvelous ways. Well, Carney is pledging to introduce countermeasures to protect Canadian industries and workers, obviously mid-campaign as well. So everybody's paying even closer attention than they already were, which is saying something. Carney emphasizing Canada's commitment to defending its economic interests and ensuring fair treatment in international trade. Why don't we hear from Mark Carney? He spoke obviously to reporters for just a brief period of time yesterday, not a huge media availability. We'll expect to hear more from the Liberal leader today, but here's Mark Carney.
We're going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7. In a crisis, it's important to come together, and it's essential to act with purpose and with force, and that's what we will do.
All right, with purpose and with force. So that's Liberal leader Mark Carney in prime ministerial mode. This is also kind of an interesting one. We've been hearing from guests over the past few days, including Nick Taylor-Vacey from Politico yesterday. By the way, check out my view from Alberta in Politico's Ottawa Playbook today. It's out right now at Politico.com. I focused on two key writings. Just some insights into Calgary Confederation. Interesting conversation with Corey Hogan. I keep calling him, for fun, podcaster Corey Hogan. He's done more than that, but everybody knows him as co-host of The Strategist. Going up against Jeremy Nixon, former UCP MLA. And then I focus on Edmonton Griesbaugh. I think that's an interesting riding. Okay. You got Kerry Diott, who beat Edmonton councillor Karen Principe for that Conservative nomination, going up against the incumbent Blake Desjardins, who, of course, beat Diot in 2021. So that's the Ottawa playbook. But Taylor Vasey talking, along with others, about the opportunities that Mark Carney has right now to appear prime ministerial, to step back into that role as opposed to campaign mode as the Liberal leader. And that's the opportunity that he has right now. So despite the exemptions, which I think was good news for some people, good news for most people, this announcement on April 2nd, the persistence of earlier duties definitely continues to strain U.S.-Canada relations. And so the Canadian government, I think, is doing what it can to appear, at least, to remain vigilant. And I bet you there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes that's not being done by the party leaders and those that are campaigning for seats, right? Like there's still business happening, although not full force, not pedal to the metal, to advocate for the removal of these tariffs because they're impacting people as we speak right now and seeking to prevent further economic repercussions. So while Canada, I guess the takeaway is that Canada sidesteps on the 2nd of April on Liberation Day, the most recent round of U.S. tariffs, the enduring impact of prior trade barriers definitely underscoring ongoing challenges in this bilateral economic relationship. Pretty interesting to see what's been happening with U.S. senators. You saw that just hours ago, as a matter of fact, approving a resolution opposing President Trump's tariffs on imports from Canada. This was just hours after his Liberation Day event, and that includes Senator Rand Paul, who is being called out right now by Fox News, along with Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Yeah,
which is odd, but he's on his way out, so maybe he's doing. People are like, maybe he's doing some things right before he gets out.
Side note, just a small observation. Wild to see the state of Mitch McConnell right now. Did you see him under escort, being like in a wheelchair, being taken to his SUV? It's like, geez. Out of Kentucky, of course, Susan Collins, the senator out of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska, siding with Democrats in voting for a resolution, ultimately that passed, that would repeal the emergency declaration. This was the one that allowed Donald Trump in the first place to levy taxes on Canada by citing that deadly fentanyl flowing across the border like you just talked about. So the measure introduced by Senator Kaine out of Virginia passed the upper chamber of Congress by 3 votes, 51-48. Now, it probably won't survive the House.
It won't make it
the GOP-controlled House, but its passage certainly, and I think optically, why don't we hear from Rand Paul here? Optically, a small victory for Democrats that have definitely been looking for an attack line ahead of the midterms, and that is relevant. That's very relevant to Donald Trump and everybody else. But here's Senator Rand Paul in stating, or at least giving some of the justification as to why he took a risk politically and voted the way that he did.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
So that's Senator Rand Paul, a Republican. Sharan Kaur's been keeping a keen eye on this. Obviously, you know her as a national commentator on CTV, iHeartRadio. She's a partner at Sovereign Advisory, and of course, she is eyeballs deep in the federal election campaign. Thanks for making time for us. It's good to see you.
Definitely eyeballs deep, because I completely forgot I had to be here, despite you reminding me. So thank you for that. I am here. I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah, well, we had everything running so smoothly that nobody would have known the difference. What were you, I think you probably, like 35, 40 million other people, paying keen attention to this announcement mid-afternoon on the 2nd of April. The president in the Rose Garden, we're wondering, what's this going to look like, not just for Canada, but for the rest of the world? At the end of the day, with the dust starting to settle, how are you analyzing what you saw from President Trump?
Oh my God, there's going to be documentaries about the level of unhinged this all has been. Listen, I'm optimistic because there's just so much going on. Now, that was just a weird press conference on every level when it came to pulling out the props with the charts and everybody where's Canada on the list. Honestly, and full disclosure here, I am advising the Liberals. I am supporting and running a local candidate here in Toronto. And we're all trying to figure out how to react. And there was a bit of a sigh of relief when we saw Canada wasn't there, but then we were also like, wait, is he going to pull out another board that's going to have like Canada listed with like a gajillion things. So honestly, this is very unorthodox what's going on. But I gotta say, what made me feel somewhat better was the fact that he didn't refer to us as the 51st state, didn't refer to us or our leader as the governor. So there's a lot, but if we're looking at this very clearly, this is pretty consequential what he put out there. It's a level of like economic warfare against the entire world. Like there's some countries that he's put like 90% tariffs on.
Yeah.
Another interesting point, he listed Taiwan as a country, which is probably a really good thing coming from him and what's happening with China. So there was just a whole lot going there. But for Canada, I got to say, if you asked me about a month and a half ago, if we would have seen it de-escalate to this, I would have been kind of skeptical, but still got to outline the level of impact, the 25% on auto industry and steel and aluminum. It's pretty debilitating. I think S&P Global and the Auto Manufacturers Parts Association said if it continues at this rate, 25% tariffs is 4 times the profit margins of what they make, and it's going to debilitate the industry within 2 weeks and shut it down. So nothing is good here, but it's not the worst of it. And I got to say, I got to give Mark Carney some kudos for being able to de-escalate it to what he did.
I feel like I think I'm a little bit older than you, so I might be dating I don't know if you remember the late night sketch, the comedy sketch, Lowered Expectations, and it was like a dating service. Do you remember this? It was like Lowered Expectations, and it just sort of feels like now we're sitting here, and I share your enthusiasm around the fact, like, wow, he like didn't refer to us as the 51st state. Like he, in a way,
which is crazy,
just acknowledged Canada's sovereignty, which I guess that's a start. This is how much we've lowered our expectations on where this relationship is at right now.
Yeah.
What does Mark Carney have to talk to the premiers about? And ultimately, what's the smart position for Canada to take here?
So I think there's a few things. We have to really look at Canada as a whole. And I think we're seeing that with pretty much all the provinces, with the exception of Alberta, who has been the outlier. And I don't want to dismiss their issues or their concerns, because there tends to be this feeling of alienation. But we're seeing Doug Ford, who, if you asked a lot of people what they would think about him a couple of years ago, they probably wouldn't be as enthusiastic about who he is right now. But the guy is pretty much like held down the line on being Team Canada and a team player. But what Mark Carney has to do is unify to a certain extent. There's been years of provinces kind of focusing on their own protectionism, mainly Alberta. And I think Alberta is the outlier here, because if anyone read the ridiculous piece that Preston Manning put out yesterday about, like, if the Liberals win, basically expect there to be a separation of the West. And that stuff is not helpful. At the end of the day, we are Canadians. We are Canada. And as much as provinces want to have their own level of protectionism, in Alberta specifically, because of oil and what they believe is an alienation by the West and equalization and how much money they put into the pool, I think those are all valid conversations to be had. But he really has to unify everyone and bring Danielle Smith on board. I think she is going to be the outlier here, because she was down in Florida, I think talking to Ben Shapiro or whatever. She was on a podcast where she had said she actually asked Trump to delay the tariffs because it would help Pierre Poilievre. Like, I'm not going to use terms that are inflammatory, because I understand it's a bit of a different world out there. And you're out there. I spent time working in Alberta as well. There is a bit of a different mentality, but what she's doing is not helpful to the unity of the country. And I think what Mark Carney has to do in his role as prime minister and as leader is bridge a gap. He too is from that area, right? We need to build that gap, that our oil resources, our natural resources, are our country's pride and jewel. They are not Alberta's to use as a bargaining chip. But I honestly find her to be a bit problematic, because while we're in this point of unifying, and what Donald Trump has done has unified us as a country to a certain extent, the people like Preston Manning and Danielle Smith, who are out there promoting some of this ideology, is not helpful.
Well, yeah, I don't know if they're like promoting it in so many ways as they're threatening it, right? It's like Danielle Smith she'll walk a fine line of not sort of throwing, I guess I don't want to say she's throwing gas on the fire, but at the same time, by even invoking the phrase national unity crisis, what you do is fan the flames, right? To quote from Manning's piece in the Globe and Mail, he says, the bottom-up support for Western secession, another one of those populist movements that Central Canada has never anticipated or understood, is currently centered in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but has the potential to spread to most of BC, Manitoba, and the adjacent territories, depending on how it's organized and led. He says, and this time, gives himself a pat on the back. Unlike the late 1980s, there is no Reform Party to redirect that populist energy into a West wants in direction. And to Preston's credit, he built the Reform Party and achieved official opposition status. But that idea is there. Could you see a world that this gets so bad that half of the country geographically is convinced to split at Manitoba West?
No. And this is where I think it's just stoking the flames. Like, we're going back, we're in a period of time where people are angered. And what I try to tell folks who bring up the national unity and the whole nonsense about Canada not having an identity, you as a country, there are voters who will lean to certain directions, whether you're conservative, liberal, NDP, whatever you are. But your country's identity should not be dependent on who is in office. And your separation from the country shouldn't be dependent on who is in office. Canada is Canada. Just because there's a liberal government and you don't necessarily appreciate the direction they've gone in, or you want to do different things, I don't think that justifies separating from the country. I think it's opportunistic, and I think it shows that you're not willing to be a team player. Now, I know there's different perspectives. A lot of this is rooted in the energy sector, for example. We've seen it. We've seen people try to build projects and infrastructure and it doesn't get done. And we know the resources are in Alberta, and they feel like they're getting the shorter end of the stick. But if you're unhappy with that and your solution is, well, we want to separate, that just basically means you have no loyalty to your country. And I don't mean that in some sort of way of like, it's not treasonous. I think it's opportunistic. I think it's not a helpful dialogue. What you should be doing is having the dialogue of how do we break the barriers to actually do these things. And it makes me a little bananas to think that it took Donald Trump to get our premiers and our leaders to actually give a crap about our like interprovincial trade issues and like building pipelines. Like, listen, I know there's a lot of super environmental liberals there, but you're talking to one who worked in Alberta in the energy sector. I was working on projects like Keystone XL. I was working on Energy East. I just moved back from the Middle East, having worked at the largest energy company in the world. I am very pro energy and pro oil and getting our resources out. The question is everybody else. And now we're seeing Quebec, for example. We saw Premier Legault recently come out and say, there is a shift, but we need social acceptance. But that social acceptance requires our leaders to be better. It requires our leaders to not be so opportunistic for their own province, but versus the entire country. And once we can get to that position, that's when we break down the true barriers.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So you're organizing in the Greater Toronto area right now. You're working on the Liberal campaign. You've worked in energy. You've worked in oil and gas in Canada and in the Middle East. This question is not just for the Alberta audience, but they will keenly anticipate your answer. Everybody's wondering if attitudes are changing in Eastern Canada, probably most particularly in Quebec, but still, let's say Eastern Canada, around pipelines, around access, around energy expansion. And the word out here is that while there may be some talk and there may be some polling to support the idea that Alberta's industry and Canada's bottom line could benefit from this, that ultimately Mark Carney would not see it happen. Stephen Guilbeault's appointment in Quebec, maybe Exhibit A, but I think that there's more to it than that. What do you think? Could it happen under a Prime Minister Mark Carney?
So I'm going to speak from my liberal perspective and not as someone who is in potential, who's in government or who has worked in government. I hope so. I think so. I think that we do have an existential crisis of what's happening in the world with climate change. Do I think the solution is to cut us off at our resources? No, I don't think so. We have to survive. And I don't think people realize how much natural resources are part of our day-to-day lives, how much petroleum is part of our day-to-day lives. So I think that for someone like Mark Carney and the Liberal Party, they're going to have to tread that. They're going to have to tread that line very carefully, because what's the alternative? Are we going to just switch to solar and wind and all that stuff? Because it doesn't provide the same type of, I would say, resources we need. So I think, yes, there is a level of reality check there's going to have to be had. And listen, someone like Stephen Guilbeault is very alienating to a lot of people. And as someone who was in the sector, I personally would not have appointed someone like him in the role he had, because it just alienates people. And that is the type of signal, the virtue signaling, that people in Alberta and the energy sector get triggered by. And so I think what we need to move away from is these virtuous positions that we give people because of their background. So in his case, he was an environmentalist, and they said, hey, who would be better to oversee the environment ministry than an environmentalist? I don't actually think that's how we should be appointing ministers, for example. It creates it just creates this tension among citizens, and it creates a dialogue that is unnecessary and unhelpful to the cause. So I hope that someone like Mark brings a bit more thought to how we put people in positions who serve the industry while looking out for the best interest of the country and the environment, but less signaling and more reasonable approaches, I would say.
Yeah, nobody asked me, but if I was trying to convince Canadians that Mark Carney was not Trudeau 2.0, Stephen Guilbeault would have been the first one out, not the first one appointed to anything. But like I said, no one asked me. Sharan, it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for kicking in your perspective on this amid what I know is a very busy day for you. Sharan Kaur is a partner at Sovereign Advisory. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got it. Doug Griffiths coming up in just a moment, former Progressive Conservative cabinet minister in the province of Alberta, now president, CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. They're doing a ton of heavy lifting, not just through the federal election campaign, but through this trade war as well, to help businesses better understand what the landscape looks like and how it's changing. Saw you, Jules, on our live chat powered by Park Power. Jules says, the West is not splitting from the East. Says the majority of Albertans don't even want that, let alone the rest of Canada. That's Jules in our live chat. We'll get to more in the live chat, which is banging this morning. I saw you issue a gentle reminder to everybody in there, Johnny. Yeah, no name calling. No name calling,
well, hey,
everybody.
man, get as fired up as you want. These tariff things gets everyone excited. But
we love the enthusiasm.
Let's debate. And it doesn't even have to be polite. You can get angered. Just
keep the language clean. And
don't call people twits and morons and whatever. Yeah.
Twits to me seems like a soft insult.
I don't know. Twit kind of irks me. Maybe I would rather be called a moron than a twit.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Gosh, moron always rolls off the tongue so nicely, doesn't it? But we don't want to be calling each other that.
I'm used to moron.
Plus, we have this. We have the CEO of the chamber coming on. We got to keep it classy right now, everybody. We talked to you about Park Power and how they're powering our Real Talk live chat. But did you know that they are currently offering the lowest fixed electricity rate in the entire province? That's 6.69 cents per kilowatt hour, offering electricity, natural gas, and internet across the province with low rates, awesome service, and we love that they share their profits with nonprofits. They share with Alberta charities for exclusive deals, including some bundle opportunities for Real Talkers. Check out parkpower.ca/Real Talk. You can learn more about, if you sign up for electricity only, how you can save $50 by using the promo code RealTalk50. And if you bundle all three, electricity, natural gas, and internet, the promo code RealTalk will knock up $150 in savings off your first bill, plus the lowest rates around. There's no catch, and they'll even break up with your former provider for you so you don't have to have that awkward conversation. That's parkpower.ca/Real Talk. All this talk about money, all this talk about wealth management, markets, and the bottom line. People are looking for a steady hand and a studied voice to guide them through wealth and investing. That's exactly what the team at North Road Investment Council offers. They know that successful saving can create unexpected challenges. We're looking at one right now, and that's where their financial advisors, led by Marshall and Carrie, come in. They partner with discerning families, foundations, and associations on this winding path with expert navigation, and they offer one-of-a-kind digital risk advisory services. You can find out how you may be exposed digital risk-wise by taking a free quiz on their website. That's northroadic.com. If you're looking this spring to get organized, to declutter, and to improve not just the value of your home, but your experience living there, you're going to want to request a free consultation with California Closets, custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home, and proudly Canadian owned. California Closets, as a matter of fact, everything that they're installing in garages and second bedrooms, those Murphy beds, boot rooms, entryways, mudrooms, laundry rooms, and those primary bedroom dream walk-in closets, well, it's all manufactured right here in Alberta. Custom designed to fit your space and your budget. You can request that free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. All right, let's get to this. Business owners and operators, investors, and everyday folks paying keen attention to the president's announcement on the 2nd of April, wondering what it'll do to markets. And early signs are not good, as markets have been tumbling in response to Trump's global trade war. Doug Griffiths is the president and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, and they've got hundreds of members paying very close attention to this kind of stuff. Welcome back to the show. What's one thing you were focusing on as the president was speaking in the Rose Garden? I think we got you on mute, Doug. We want to get you, sure that there you are.
There we go. Okay. That, I think a lot of people are going to be happy and feel a little bit of relief because Canada seems to not be facing a big crunch because the Free Trade Act is still going to stand. But in my mind, so we dodged one bullet, but his gun is loaded, and May 2nd, we could face a new challenge, and June 2nd, a new challenge. And this president has thrived on creating chaos. That's how he negotiates. And so I don't know. I think we maybe, like I said, dodged a bullet, but I don't think we're free and clear yet. Yeah. I think this means we need to focus on what Canada is going to do moving forward, and we can't waste this opportunity.
Yeah, so let's move north of the border. We Carney was essentially spent the majority of the 2nd of April behind closed doors, obviously probably taking in what he was seeing and strategizing. Now he'll be communicating with the premiers and then with Canadians. Yeah. What's the business community? What are you hoping to hear and hoping to see from the Prime Minister and premiers across the country?
Well, premiers across the country and the Prime Minister and anybody else that's running in this federal election. I mean, I want the business community to challenge federal leaders and provincial leaders on three big areas. We need interprovincial free trade. We're talking about $200 billion more injected into our economy, 3 to 4% increase in our GDP, depending on which economist you want to follow through on. We've got an 18% productivity gap with the United States right now, which could be cut by a third with interprovincial free trade. I want to see investments in infrastructure, rail, road, runway, and pipelines. If we cut some of the administrative costs on flights right now, we could add between 5 and 10 million more affordable flights, which would improve the productivity. Investments in rail and road and then the pipelines could frankly cut the productivity gap in half. And then I want to see a reform of our tax system because I don't think we have a very competitive tax system across this country. And it's time that we focused on what we could do to help kickstart our economy. Because like I said to you before, Ryan, the United States economy, the world's largest economy, has been across a very porous border, and we've been allowed to trade with it, and it's made us lazy and complacent. And it's time that we focused on what's good for the Canadian economy and how we're going to market ourselves to the rest of the world. And because the strength over-relied on, which was our trade with the U.S., becomes a weakness, and that's evident. And we may have dodged this bullet, but if we don't do something about our state of affairs in those three areas now, then when the next crisis comes, which could very well come in the next 4 years or in the next month, then we're going to deserve that one because we wouldn't have acted appropriately.
You come at your current role from an interesting position, having been a senior provincial cabinet minister, and so you understand how the politics works, and obviously you're understanding how the business works, and being able to sort of merge the two helps the general public understand how these things happen. So Sharan Kaur, right before we talk to you, makes an interesting point. She talks about the possibility of energy expansion in Canada. We're hearing talk on the campaign trail of a national energy corridor. I know it's not the first time that's been put in front of Canadians before, but based on your experience and your knowledge of how things work, do you think it's actually possible? Like, I know that many Canadians, including those employed in Western Canada in oil and gas or the energy industry, want to believe that there may be more of an appetite for pipelines and energy expansion, but oftentimes at the end of the day, it's all talk. It never materializes. And then you talk to people behind the scenes and they laugh that anybody ever believed it would happen in the first place. So where's your head actually at?
Well, that's why, and I'll reemphasize this, that if we waste this opportunity and we don't do something about it, then it's our fault for destroying our economy and whatever the rest of the world, including the United States, does to us. It will be our fault. It is high time that this country, use a negative phrase, but we've got to quit pulling the wool over our eyes and saying, oh, good, we're all back to normal and everything will be just fine. It hasn't been fine for a generation. Our productivity lags. We haven't got the appropriate infrastructure investment. We have been lazy and complacent. And I will endlessly push that we deal with the tax structure, that we invest in the appropriate infrastructure, and that we get rid of these trade tariffs, because the ego is getting in the way of Canada's success. This is not about any individual. It's not about any individual province, and it's not about individual politicians. This is about Canada's economic success. And so it's not about me. It's about my kids and the next generation. And it's going to take us a generation to fix this substantially, but we better get on with it. And I and my chamber colleagues and other businesses, I want them to say enough. No more joking about this. This isn't just, fun make-believe stuff that we're going to talk about for a while until the problem goes away. We need this done now. This is just the tipping point, Trump's tariff talk, to wake us up. But if we don't stay awake and get on to action, get the hell out of bed and get to work, then our bed sores are going to be our responsibility.
Ooh, bed sores. In our live chat powered with the visual. Live chat powered by Park Power. Seventh Pilot says a corridor with Bill C-69 can't happen. Carney says 69 stays, yet he wants an energy corridor. Garth, watching live, says, man, oh man, 158 years of Confederation, and we are just exploring free trade among provinces. Chad F says 100% we need to commit long-term changes to not be caught like this again. I know you got a bolt, but before you do, Doug, your team has been doing remarkable work. We were referring people to the Edmonton Chamber Instagram. You guys have a ton of resources related to the election, including one feature, What You're Watching. And you get into what your team is paying attention to on the advocacy front, on the policy front, federally, provincially, and municipally. Are you seeing the federal campaigns pivot like you'd like to see them pivot with all of this news breaking and the landscape changing so dynamically day to day?
They're getting there. The challenge is, I think there's still a little bit of reactionary measures to what is happening south of the border. So the policies and the announcements are, smaller tax cuts. They're improvised measures. What I want to see from the federal parties is for both of them to come up with really robust long-term strategies about what the next decade is going to mean for infrastructure investments, what tax reform is going to look like, and interprovincial trade. I want both parties and whoever forms government to be serious about this. And so I don't want responses to what's going on now. I want responses because of what's going on now to what it's going to mean for Canada for the next generation. And it's coming. There's still lots of days left in the campaign, but I'm going to continue to push that.
Doug Griffiths is the president and CEO of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for making time for us today. We appreciate the insights.
Always. Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
You got it. You can find out more about what Doug and his team are doing, including benefits of membership, by visiting edmontonchamber.com. That's where you can start leveraging your membership today. They've got a ton of events going on. You can check out the events link, including their monthly. I love this. They do the Coffee with the Chamber, which is just a fantastic way to network and meet other people in your space. They've also got, coming up on the 16th of April, their federal candidate meet and greet. You can learn more by checking out edmontonchamber.com. Rachel Gilmore in less than 60 seconds, but first, our friends at Solar by Kuby. We want to let you know how happy and proud we are to be joining them in celebrating 10 years in business. John, I remember when this business first launched. Hey. I did an interview with their CEO on a terrestrial radio station. He was this young whippersnapper, and he was coming out of oil and gas. He'd been an electrician there for a long time, and he said, gosh, I don't know. I just, a born and raised Alberta boy, he said, I just see so much potential in green energy. I see where solar's going. And he left his job in oil and gas, started Kuby Energy with one other guy and one pickup truck, and now they've grown to Western Canada's busiest solar installer. What an amazing journey over these 10 years. You can get a free solar quote today by visiting kuby.ca. You're going to want to do it before the 20th of April, because in recognition and in celebration of their 10 years in business, they're giving away 10 grand. 2 Kuby customers are going to receive $5,000 off their installation. They're going to be drawing 2 names of Kubi customers at their big summer solstice party on the 20th of June. You can get your name in. As long as you paid your deposit, you're entered. You don't have to have the panels even installed yet. You can get that free quote today. Get the ball rolling at kubi.ca. And we also wanted to let you know about something very cool coming up with our friends at Friesen Brothers at select location stores. You know these Friesen Brothers Fresh Market stores on the 5th and 6th of April, their first ever Filipino feast. This is all the classics and all you can eat, by the way. Filipino food, Alberta experience. Celebrate the vibrant flavors of authentic Filipino cuisine at the Kitchen's Buffet, featuring Filipino favorites like pork adobo, chicken afritada, and more, all prepared by Friesen Brothers Red Seal chefs. Gather your friends and family for a feast to remember. It's just $25 per person, and you can learn more by checking out their website. That's friesen.com. This is kind of a wild story that we touched on earlier this week. One of Canada's, to be quite honest with you, best known independent journalists for sure. She's got a history in mainstream media. She and I were colleagues at Global News together, but I think it's Rachel Gilmore's work, probably her investigative journalism, that's been broadcast, essentially distributed on social media channels, that's turned her into a household name across the country. Presumably why CTV tapped her on the shoulder to be their federal election fact checker. Well, as you heard on our April 2nd episode, that didn't last long. After she was lit up by one of Pierre Poilievre's communications soldiers online, Gilmore was informed that her segment was being canceled. It's a pleasure to welcome Rachel Gilmore to this episode of Real Talk. Thanks for making time for us. How are you holding up? This is probably still a little raw.
It's definitely been overwhelming, but I'm feeling good. The support has really been overwhelmingly lovely. So I think I'm feeling surprisingly good given the circumstances.
Is it fair to say that your entire experience has not always been that online feedback has been lovely?
Definitely not on Twitter. I think that once Blue Sky was created, things started feeling a little more hopeful because I think that Twitter is like a unique cesspool, and it was where all of us journalists did most of our stuff, right? It's where we hung out the most. But yeah, existing on other platforms has given me hope that maybe the world isn't so dark and evil. But every time I tap back into Twitter, it's a nightmare.
Do you mind if we talk about the situation itself? I mean, you obviously, you had on your social channels had indicated how excited you were. You said a little personal news. You're going to be joining CTV's morning show every Friday for the election to fact check the campaign. I witnessed everybody, applauding and clapping, all the emojis, all the stuff. They were really excited for you. A great opportunity. Right up until a guy by the name of Sebastian Skamsky, who's been working on the Poilievre campaign, called you out, describing you as a disgraced disinformation peddler, alleging that you were going to lie directly to CTV viewers under the guise of news, and that's where this thing really exploded.
Yeah, and it was such a concerning comment. Like, I know that it was a personal attack, and that's probably what I should care more about. But honestly, reading it, it made me worried for our democracy in a way, because he didn't actually have any critiques of my work. He just wanted people to reject any fact check that they heard on CTV or Morning simply because of the messenger, and wanted to poison the well so people don't even take the information I give and go and look into it themselves and decide for themselves if they, agree with it or what. He wanted them to outright dismiss it. And that is so problematic. That's not what we should be encouraging anyone to do. But obviously that then led to also a lot of personal attacks that sucked pretty bad. It was not very nice out there.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I can't speak from personal experience of being a woman in journalism, but it strikes me just as an observer that you might get piled on harder than anybody else in the country. I think probably part of that, my observation, might be the work that you've done in exposing online extremism and writing about incels and the like. But these are your walked miles. It has to take a toll.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that I deal with a lot more of this mainly because of the format that I work in. It's so accessible, right? So like a lot of neo-Nazis don't like to read, I don't think, but the fact that I was doing like 2-minute videos, they were like, "Oh, she's talking about us." Whereas if I, when I was just doing articles, it was a little bit less intense, the hatred. But yeah, it's been a lot. I think the biggest concern that I have is a lot of my critics, because I reported on the pandemic, I reported on the Freedom Convoy, I've reported on far right extremism and conspiracy theories. It's like I'm playing whack-a-mole with all of the stuff that pisses people off the most online. Oh, sorry, can I say that word?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so I think that because of that, I have a unique group of haters that they function in a different reality, right? Like their premises, the facts that they operate off of are totally different from what is actually real. And so what's tough about that is when you have a critical mass of people who genuinely like have these conspiratorial beliefs, it's really hard to hit back at them other than to just say like, well, what you're saying is genuinely not true, but they think that I lie all the time. So like, I can't hit back at that. So I just need to trust that the people who actually make decisions about who to platform and like what criticisms are good faith and what are bad faith, and the people who control career opportunities won't listen to the bad faith campaigns because that's what they are. But they're coming in a critical number that makes it really hard, I think. It makes it more challenging to push back against, because I think a lot of people see that and they'll say, where there's smoke, there's fire, even if someone's literally holding a smoke machine.
We got an interesting comment here in our live chat. Scott's watching us, and he says, you guys, I think he's talking about me and you. He says, you guys are alike as reporters. Number one, I'm not a reporter. Whereas you draw subjective conclusions as the presenter rather than presenting evidence and letting your listeners draw their own conclusions. I'll take Scott's point. I never purport to be someone. I'm not a news anchor. I don't present information, let people draw their own conclusions. I have opinions on pretty much everything, and that's the whole fucking point of the show. But you've been accused of allowing activism to bleed into your journalism. Do you think it's a fair criticism? I mean, like, were you surprised in the first place that they wanted you to be a fact checker as opposed to an opinion presenter?
I wasn't surprised by that, because the reality is if I think that Scott's not really speaking based off of my work. He's speaking based off assumptions about my work. If you actually watch my videos, I will present you with all the facts. I will also offer my own analysis so you know where I'm coming from. Because to me, I actually think that's more responsible. I think I'm being more transparent than rather than pretend to have a view from nowhere and to be a robot, which no one is. I don't think that full neutrality and full objectivity exists. So I think that instead of pretending that I can fully achieve that, I'm going to give you all the facts. I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from, and then you can critically assess the information I'm giving you, which is, again, the full range of information. You need to draw your own conclusion, and then you can decide if you agree with me. And I think that, frankly, it's more responsible that way. I mean, I think that it's a bold kind of modern choice to put me in a position of fact checker, but frankly, I'm good at that. I do it well. I provide all the information. If you watch my videos, I'm, covering the election right now, and I'll tell you what Poilievre's promising. I'm not like, just sitting there trashing people, but I'm also not going to sacrifice reality to avoid the perception of bias. And the reality is there have been scholarly studies done, and I'm really sorry to say this, but there is more disinformation shared on the right. Do you want me to pretend there isn't? Do you want me to make false equivalencies just so that people can feel good and feel like I'm treating both sides equally? I'm going to just deal with reality. And I think that, frankly, all good journalists should, to a certain degree, be activists, because we are activists in terms of providing people with all the information they need to live full lives and form their own opinions based on the facts. I think that's what journalists should do. And if I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from in terms of how I feel about things, if anything, that's just more transparent.
Press Progress, Luc Lebrun reported at length around what happened to you, and we were citing his report yesterday, and you had recorded and released some audio of your conversation with CTV producer Jennifer McLean, about 7 minutes worth. We played some on the show in our most recent episode. You can hear it kind of, I was trying to put myself in your shoes, and it seems like when you were going into that phone call, you were not expecting to have the segment canceled. What were you expecting to talk to her about?
Honestly, I was a little bit mentally prepared just because I worked for CTV, right? Like I know how these newsrooms function, and I know how much they hate blowback online and how bad they are at determining good faith versus bad faith outrage, like whether it's something where critiques are rooted in reality versus legitimate criticism that someone has like done unethical stuff, you know? So I was kind of expecting it because of the fact that they called down my first Friday segment. They had me on the Tuesday. There was all the blowback. The Polyev guy did his tweet. And then the next day, I was told there was a scheduling conflict with a premiere for that Friday, but that they loved me and that they'll talk to me next week. And I was like, okay, we'll see. And then I got the call. And I was mentally prepared for it. But I was hoping they wouldn't, because it to me was just like, frankly, kind of it's just cowardly. And I was hoping that they'd have more of a backbone in the face of that. Because the reality is, I mean, she says at the end of the call, and I posted the entirety of the call from the beginning to the end. The only thing I muted was her last name because I don't want her to get harassed. And she says at the end of the call that she wishes the world was different, or she wishes we lived in a better world. But the reality is that these newsrooms have the capacity to create that better world.
Of course
if they
do.
learn to stand up to these, if they learn to stand up to these bad faith campaigns, then they are the ones. Because the thing is I am not the first person this has happened to. And that's the bigger issue here. Like, it's not actually about me. It's about the journalists before me and the journalists to come after me who have faced similar bad faith campaigns, but don't have my platform and don't have my freedom and don't have, frankly, the job stability that I am afforded by having the subscribers I have to be able to work as an independent, that I can effectively burn a bridge to highlight an issue that impacts all of us. How many journalists have gone quietly into the night after being canceled like this? How many journalists have lost their jobs and struggled to find new employment because newsrooms didn't have their back in the face of bad faith outrage? That, to me, is the bigger issue here. And that's an issue that impacts our democracy.
By the way, Scott followed up in the chat and he says, this show rocks. Rachel Gilmore is, for some reason, an important voice in Canadian political culture. She's brave and she's pretty fun. So there you go. Scott circles back.
Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate
maybe
that.
you won him over.
Hey.
Let me ask you about this because you're right. And we talked about this in our most recent episode. This is an example of how political pressure influences Canadian media every single day. And people think, if people think that it doesn't, they're a little bit naive, I have to be honest. But how do you feel about the Press Progress headline? CTV canceled a fact-checking segment in response to political pressure from Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. Like, Press Progress draws a direct line from the CTV C-suite or the executive producer's office straight to the Poilievre campaign. Whereas the phone call with the producer, she's talking a lot about the trolls and the pressure and how she feels like all the attention on the segment is kind of overshadowing the work that their team is doing. Like, she doesn't say, Jenny Byrne called us and told us to pull the plug. What's your thought?
Well, she wouldn't, right? But I mean, we don't know what conversations CTV had, but what we do know is that tweet from Sebastian Skamsky was one of, and that's Poilievre's guy, was one of the most liked tweets attacking me. It was one of the most prominent forms of the backlash that she's referring to. It was what was used as a jumping off point for other folks to critique me. You know, there were Sebastian Skamsky made his comment, and then there's Joe Warmington, a prominent columnist, in the replies. Then there's Brian Lilly quote tweeting it, another prominent columnist. So, you do have to recognize that one of the loudest voices on this and one of the vectors of amplification within this conversation was this conservative media liaison. And they haven't said a word. They haven't distanced themselves from this. They haven't denied this. And to me, that is really concerning. Like, a lot of campaigns and stuff, if you have a staffer going rogue and attacking people in a really big, really public way that elicits this kind of a response from the public, you would maybe do something about that, right? Not a word. The campaign hasn't contacted me. There's been nothing. And to me, I think that it's really clear that that was a big part of what fueled the backlash, just by numbers alone. You can see it.
Got an interesting comment here from Vamp Fashions, and I'd love your response to this. Vamp says, I love how Rachel so casually throws around the journalist title and yet denies that 40-year reporter with journalism degree David Menzies is a journalist. For people unfamiliar with the I wish people could see your face right now. David Menzies, Ezra Levant's foot soldier for Rebel News. Go ahead, Rachel.
David Menzies likes to bump into people and make that the entire news segment. I'm sorry, but who does that serve? It serves Rebel News maybe when they fundraise off of it. But I think journalists should be doing their reporting for the public interest. And I think that if you look at Rebel News and look at what, there was a literal court decision that found that they didn't meet the qualifications to be considered journalists. So, I'll defer to the courts on that. But I think that David Menzies is a fairly ridiculous person who has made comments on his, he's gone on radio shows, talked about me removing my blouse for Justin Trudeau, like in some hypothetical weird fantasy. I'm sorry, is that what journalists do?
Fair question.
You tell me.
Do you know, are you familiar with Fish Grakowski? He's a longtime arts and entertainment writer, music reviewer, film reviewer, a good friend of mine. He works for Post Media, as a matter of fact, right here in Edmonton. He wrote in when he found out that you were going to be on the show today. He wrote me a personal text. I circled back and I said, can I please read it attributed? He said, sure. He says, Rachel is inspiring and terrific and doing extremely solid work turning up political engagement in the wider media ecosystem. She's obviously, like all humans, got a perspective, one that she took to the UN, Fish says, but as an example of fairness, shone a bright light on what she saw as a big Mark Carney stumble this week, just as CTV disappointingly pudding-pooped down its leg in direct service of a mob supposedly obsessed with the evils of cancel culture. Fish says it's a loss specifically for scrappy independent journalism poking into doily and candy bowl living rooms. And while this is perhaps no huge consolation, the network's rather newsworthy fumble will certainly get more eyes on Rachel's actual reporting and actual fact-checking. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. I work really friggin' hard to help you guys by making sure you have as much information as possible to be able to form your own opinions about the political moment that we're living in, So you can go and check that out, see what you think of it. But I also think in a broader sense, it's really important to embrace these new forms of media and new styles of communication, for lack of a better word, because we as journalists shouldn't be like all prissy about maintaining our buttoned up TV segments, right? Like we need to meet the viewers where they're at. If we don't go where they're scrolling and where they're consuming information, which are currently fueled with a lot of disinformation actors, then those disinformation actors are going to be all people have access to. So we as journalists have to not only exist on those platforms, but we have to embrace the formatting of those platforms. And I think it's really frustrating to feel in some ways as though that can be viewed as a disqualifying thing by the mainstream, especially more sort of right-wing columnists will say things like, they'll decry me doing TikToks, although I noticed Brian Lilly's been making some TikToks that look a lot like mine. But it's interesting to me that that can be something or a reason why people might take you less seriously, when in reality, I think that my reporting gets to more people and informs more people than a lot of mainstream news. And I wish that more of them would show up in these spaces, and some of them have been, because I think it's our responsibility. Anyways, you should definitely all go subscribe to me. That would be awesome, because I work really hard.
Well, and Lorraine is in our live chat right now, wondering if there's a way that she can financially support your work. We'll let everybody know they can check out rachelgilmore.substack.com. You've just released Bubble Pop. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I have a company now, which is crazy. If you told me 10 years ago I'd have to figure out accounting and stuff, I would not believe you. But yeah, I started my own media company. You can subscribe on Substack, on Patreon. I'm also on YouTube. If you don't want to pay, I make ad money from that. So and Instagram and everywhere else. But yeah, it's been going really well. I'm able to make a living off of it, which is incredible, and purely because people have an appetite for the way that I deliver news and they trust me to do so. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. I feel really honored that I earned people's trust in that way, and I plan to continue to do so by demonstrating my ethics in the kind of journalism that I do. But yeah, if you have any interest, you can absolutely subscribe. I do also make my work free so that no one is deprived of the information they need just because they can't afford it. But if you do contribute, it allows me to have more time to do this because I don't have to, go work at a diner part-time.
Yeah, fair.
Like I did when I first started in journalism.
Yeah. Man, there's those stories. The early journalism years stories. Did you, Johnny, ever like moonlight early in your radio career? Were you ever like doing, I guess you've been DJing the whole time. That's probably it. Yeah,
no. Don't cue me in on this one, okay?
But I used to, Rachel, I remember I started in Red Deer, and you'd run into people in the morning in the media scrum, and then you'd run into them like working the bar at night, and then you'd see them again in the morning in the media scrum. And that's just been the way it's been for a long time. But the whole industry is changing, right? I mean, we don't need to get into a deep dive in Canadian media, but I think you're an example of someone who's part of this kind of next wave, who's understood how to build an audience. Your audience is formidable. Off the top of my head, I would imagine between your subscribers, you're well over 250,000 at least, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Ish. And so you understand like the snippets, the short attention spans that people have, the ways to build audience, the ways to have that information resonate. I wonder if, like, to a certain degree, when people look at your style of journalism, folks that have been around a little longer, a little more life experience, they're not used to it. And when you're not used to it, and you're used to like Knowlton Nash behind the anchor desk, it can be shocking. But I think for a lot of people, media as a whole is transforming itself, not just in how the information is delivered, but how it's monetized, and it's only going to get crazier from here. I mean, it's nothing settling back into the model that was. That's unsustainable. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of people are, I mean, there are a lot of, I always, when I critique like the model of mainstream media, I do want to acknowledge there are so many incredible journalists working in these newsrooms. They do incredible work. I still watch all of the mainstream stuff and get a lot of valuable information from them. But I think that one thing that the industry has been reckoning with is the recognition from people that, if you're both siding issues where we have a sort of post-truth populism on the rise, if there's someone telling you that grass is pink and someone's telling you grass is green, your job isn't to elevate both perspectives, right? Your job is to look at the grass and tell people what color it is, And I think that we've kind of reached a point where in some ways, folks look at that as opinion, when in reality, that's just like analysis of an issue and actually doing the work of journalism. And I think that, media has gotten this wrong sometimes, where they will sacrifice the avoidance of actual bias to avoid the perception of bias. And so I think that's why the format and the style of work that I've embraced and that so many others have embraced is helpful, because again, I go back to that transparency piece. I think that people, it resonates with them that they know their narrator. And so they can consume information critically in that way. So yeah, I think that it can be uncomfortable for people who've been in the industry for a while, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong and this is not the way to do it. But right now, this is the gamble that I'm taking. This is where I personally feel we should be heading. And I hope that I'm proven right. But if not, I'll see you at the diner in 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you use the word gamble. So in our chat, and I'm really actually proud of our live chat, powered by Park Power, because you've got left-wingers, you've got right-wingers, you've got people across the political spectrum literally gathering every day to hash it out. They don't always play nice, but for the most part, they do. But Wise Kyle's watching today. He says that my interview with you today is far too plushy. And Horse Lake Ranch is wondering why I'm not asking you any questions about, quote, constantly getting fired. I mean, you were let go by Global. Your segment was canceled by CTV. I don't know if you know this. You and I have something in common. I was fired by Chorus Radio for a dust-up that I had with Alberta's premier. So okay. I've walked the miles. Yeah. I've not been piled on quite like you, but I understand what it's like when you stick your neck out there, when you take some risks editorially, when the political machine starts to work, and ultimately when you're laid down on the altar and sacrificed. So I understand that part of it. But what would you say to, Horse Lake Ranch, who says you're constantly getting fired?
I get this all the time. Folks, I haven't been fired. I've only been laid off. I've gotten severance every time. Like it's not a situation where there's been cause ever. And you can ask my employers that. Like in this instance, arguably, I lost a contract due to online outrage, and you can listen to the phone call and decide for yourself about what you think of the reason behind that. But and it wasn't even really a contract, just like a segment. But when I left CTV for a job at Global, that was my choice. And then Global laid me off due to money reasons, it was a business decision, and I was laid off with a bunch of other people. And then when I worked for Check My Ads, they also shut down their editorial arm. And my CEO was in my LinkedIn replies telling people to hire me. So, there's the online narrative that exists about me, but do your own research, to quote what a lot of folks online like to say. And don't just believe people who keep saying that I've been fired a million times, because it's frankly just not true. I didn't even get fired for my waitressing jobs, which is crazy because I wasn't very good at it.
So I just don't know that there's like in this day and age, I don't know that the big mainstream, like I'm talking the multi-billion-dollar media corporations, like all, the names, the big network names that everybody knows across the country. I don't know that there's really room anymore. And correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, for dissenting opinions. Like if you can you think of an on-air personality on any of the big networks that really takes risks and that really, like we talk about the flamethrower all the time in partnership with our wonderful friends at DQ, but like anybody that really fires up their flamethrower and takes it to them. If you look at the loudest, most critical, gutsiest voices when it comes to political commentary in Canada, they're all working for independents. Like they're all working. There are a few sort of tenured right-wing national columnists. There are, and maybe the Toronto Star's got a couple on the left that have sort of hit that job
Definitely
security.
Not to the same degree,
right?
And,
Not
and
even
I think
close.
they deal with a lot more silencing because, again, the media caves to these bad faith online outrage campaigns, and it comes way more from the right. Frankly, like I have felt the wrath of the liberals as well. Like whenever, if I critique Mark Carney, I talked about the Paul Chang story, and I had people being like, "Oh, come on, it's a mistake," and but none of them called me the C word. And it's just like it's just disproportionate, and I would be lying to you if I said it was balanced. And so the more progressive columnists that do exist in our media ecosystem don't deal with the same online outrage. And I think a fundamental issue that I wish more people would talk about is that a lot of the folks who are executives in newsrooms are a little bit older and haven't grown up on social media, don't spend all their time scrolling. That I literally had a top executive at one of the mainstream outlets I worked at tell me that they don't think we really need social media. Like within the last 3 years. That is insane. And I think that if you don't understand social media, then you don't understand how it can be gamed to attack your journalists. And then you don't understand how to adequately, responsibly, and professionally respond to them in a way that protects your journalists. So because of that, we have this bad faith outrage online machine, and there's been columns and like articles written about how effective this machine is that first emerged during Gamergate, if you want a deep cut. But that gets deployed against progressive voices, and then newsrooms do the bidding of those trolls by silencing those voices or telling them they can't cover this. I mean, just look at coverage of Gaza. That's been a huge issue there. So and then on the right, Post Media lets people say the most wild stuff in the National Post, op-ed section in service of a very biased narrative. So I just think that it's not balanced in terms of the mainstream media ecosystem. I do think that there is some really solid critical journalism. I think CBC Front Burner actually does some of the best journalism that I see in the mainstream. But in terms of like the kind of, they're discouraged from offering opinions and still try to do this neutrality thing when it comes to at least the reporters. And so you're not going to see the kind of things that I can say because they're not allowed to say it,
You've been covering the election campaign day to day, again, at rachelgilmore.substack.com. Kudos on your headline game has been very strong as of late. Bounties, backstabbing, and boneheaded blunders, candidate chaos, carbon taxes, biological clocks, and tariffs and the like. As we're now midway through, or almost through week 2 of the campaign, what's one story, not tariff related, what's one story that you're keeping a really keen eye on right now?
Ooh, do you know what? Okay, this might seem weird, but I find it really interesting we're not talking about climate change at all. Like,
Right.
I think that that's crazy because it's worse than ever. We're seeing a lot of natural disasters and stuff, and all we're talking about, and this is probably going to rile up your chat, is like we're just hearing pipelines, 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 drill baby drill, and like, mining operations and stuff, and just there's not a whole lot of chatter about our commitments to dealing with the climate crisis, which ultimately is also an economic issue. So I've been keeping an eye on that. I also I mean, just from a pure fun drama perspective, I'm loving seeing the stories about the little candidate stuff. The Paul Chang thing was interesting in terms of seeing Mark Carney's first screw up of handling a scandal, like his first big blunder. A lot of conservative candidates have been booted since, and I find that really interesting because a lot of them I was surprised when they were announced, like Roman Baber, who was seen as, I think, too controversial for the provincial conservatives. It's been really interesting to see all of a sudden we're talking about this social media that have been ignored largely until this point, and some folks are starting to get in trouble. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just a huge nerd, so like I love all of it.
No, you're making a very interesting point around climate change and the lack of focus there. I mean, obviously when you see polling heading into any election where they're sort of asking essentially like, what's the ballot box question? And that had been like top three for probably 3 straight elections. And now it's like not even in people's top 5. Affordability and obviously the relationship with the United States is what most people are paying attention to. But to see something pretty major, I mean, we obviously, now that I even invoke the Jasper wildfire, people are going to flip out. Or if we see Lytton, BC setting temperature records, the whole town wiped out by a wildfire a couple of summers ago. And we see evidence all around us. I mean, look what happened in Los Angeles. Geez. Yet memories are short because, you don't blame somebody, a single parent or a pensioner or whatever the case is, that literally can't afford groceries and putting gas in their car, or they can't afford their electricity bill and their property taxes or whatever it is. For those folks, climate change becomes less of a concern because they're worried about like today and tomorrow,
Well, and also it's not their responsibility, frankly. They're not the ones who are burning holes in the ozone with their like daily, maybe if they forget to put a can in the recycling or something. It's a corporation's issue. It's an issue of industrial emitters and corporations. And I think that by one thing that a lot of folks get wrong is like, it's like the plastic straws thing. Like that just felt so stupid because it felt like we were being gaslit. It's like, yeah, well, big companies have tankers spilling oil into oceans and are like blasting out emissions. Your plastic straw is going to be the thing that's going to make or break climate change. It's just like, no, it's not on us. And we shouldn't accept those narratives. We should be talking about the fact that it's the incredibly wealthy people who are cutting corners so that their massive multinational corporations can make more profits off of burning our earth. So like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about data centers and how ridiculous it is that, doing a single search on ChatGPT takes like 30 times more energy. And you're going to want to fact check me on that because I don't have the figures in front of me, but it takes way more energy than Google. It's nuts. And people are using it to make like AI generated images of me crying. And I'm like, yo, was that worth melting the icebergs? But like, we're not talking about these things. And again, that's on ChatGPT though. That's on them to figure out how to make that more environmentally friendly. And it annoys me when politicians like put that on people because I think it's the wrong messaging and it's why people feel alienated, right?
You can find Rachel Gilmore on How are you enjoying the blue sky? I was going to say the blue sky experiment, but it's not really an experiment anymore, is it?
No, it's fully functioning and it's less botted. Like there's so many bots and bad faith people and people like I have no idea if the people I'm talking to on Twitter are alive, like if they're real people. Whereas on Blue Sky, it's much more genuine. You're dealing with real people. The conversations are way more nuanced, and yeah, I love it.
You're on X still. You're on TikTok, you're on Instagram. Do you have a platform that you prefer for what you do, like your brand of storytelling?
I mean, TikTok is where I like film and post, but I would say like YouTube, I've really been enjoying, and I actually can make a little money from my videos there. So that's really helpful. And I also, I'm just everywhere. Like, follow me wherever you like to get your information, and I will find you. It's really hard to get away from me, unfortunately.
All right. Well,
so I'm sorry to the haters on that.
We'll make it easy to find in our show notes on YouTube and on the podcast. We've been hanging out with Rachel Gilmore. Am I allowed to ask you about any repercussions, like with CTV, or are they paying you out for this?
Yeah.
This is none of my business. Are they paying you out? Are you suing them?
You can hear it in the call.
Yeah.
Like, she says that they're going to stand firm and pay me for the segments that they canceled. It's not exactly like, a super well paid segment.
Sure. And it's not, I
haven't heard them cancel it.
It's not all about the money. Obviously, it's more about the opportunity.
No, it wasn't about exactly. Like, for me, it actually went a long way to pushing back against the narratives that trolls constantly throw at me to be able to be on this mainstream platform, right?
Yeah.
So too bad.
Hey, keep it up, Rachel. Again, people can find you at Bubble Pop with Rachel Gilmore on YouTube, or you can check out her new Substack. That's rachelgilmore.substack.com. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Yeah, take care. Let us know what you think about this to talk at ryanjesperson.com. I haven't seen the chat like that in a while.
Yeah, it was humming today.
You got some big Rachel Gilmore fans and some Rachel Gilmore critics, and I can say
critics of people who got let go from any job in their life. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Have you ever been fired?
Oh my
or laid
God,
off?
Ryan! If you're in radio, if you're in broadcasting, if you're in media, you've been laid off, you've been let go. You've had someone in an office in Toronto tell you you're making too much money, and we have the hot new person who's on social media who's going to take your job. You've been moved to a lesser slot, a higher slot. Stations have flipped to different formats. I mean, it's ridiculous to say that because someone was let go, or even if they were fired, that it's a bad thing. One door closes, another door opens. I could go a myriad of people who were Steve Jobs was fired from Apple in 1985.
Is that true?
He founded the company. Go look it up. Jerry Seinfeld was on a sitcom called Benson. He got fired after 3 episodes and went on to be Jerry Seinfeld.
Can you imagine being the guy that fired Jerry Seinfeld?
I could go on and on. Oprah Winfrey was a reporter before she became huge with her talk show. Joe Rogan. Number of people say the reason Fear Factor was canceled because of him. I don't even have to tell you how many times Howard Stern was fired from radio jobs before he became a millionaire. If you want to say a guide to success is being fired, it means you're a failure. I think it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think
Elvis Presley was told by the manager of the Grand Ole Opry that he should stick to driving trucks.
Jeez.
Give me a break.
Can you imagine just hearing a guy in the truck stop in the next shower stall over? You're like, this guy's got to get a record label. This is Greg in our live chat, powered by Park Power, says, yeah, Ryan never misses an opportunity to tell people what to think. There's a lot of people in the chat today that are just kind of like very, very touchy. In a fun way, I want to ask you, like, who hurt you? How did I hurt you? Like, I think of anything. If we're being fair about this show, like today, you've heard from a Liberal campaign operative. You've heard from a former Conservative cabinet minister. I've read detrimental or challenging comments in the chat. We seek to understand your perspective. We read your emails all the time. Like, what more are you looking for, right? I saw Erica Kirkman in our chat today, and I don't have it in front of me, Erica, but if I could paraphrase, she basically said, people that say that, like, these content creators or these editorialists have bias in their delivery. No shit, that's the whole point.
Everyone in the world
the
has
whole point.
bias. Everyone's catering to their base.
Like, do you think you would name, like, if this is just a type of show, and sorry, I don't mean to relitigate this for, like, the 99.5% of you that understand what this show is all about, but you don't call people talk about bias. Everybody's biased. Like, do you think that, like, Jordan Peterson is not biased? Do you think Ezra Levant is not biased? Do you think right? Like, everybody's biased. You are biased. I am biased. Our bias is our perspective based on our life experience. That's what it is. But you don't call a newscast real talk. You apply the label real talk to something where people say what they really think. And sometimes they change their minds. And sometimes it's incongruous with the way that they've been politically wired in past. But that's part of the journey, right? I'm not here to change people's minds, but I'm here to better understand what's happening around us and how it impacts us. And I do think that that's kind of what we bring to the table all the time. So I bet we're going to get some flamethrowers on this. I bet we'll get some emails in support of Rachel, and some that will challenge this entire exercise. That's fine. Talk at RyanJesperson.com is where you can get us. Interesting take she has, and this is not new. This has been a strongly held principle in journalism for quite a while, and that's sort of the idea. What did she say, talking about like the grass being pink, right? She says like the job of any journalist is not to put out or not to file a story for the evening news that hears from people that say that the sky is blue and then hears from people that say that the sky is pink, and to give them equal airtime, right? But I do understand, and this is a very real issue, and we've talked about this on the show at length. I remember when Neola Chorus joined us in studio a while ago, talking about people's trust and how people are losing trust in institutions. And that includes in healthcare. People are losing trust in expertise. They're losing trust in education, in post-secondary institutions. They're losing trust in the judiciary. They're losing trust in the fourth estate, in media, in journalism. And real talk, I think that professionals in that space ignore that to their own peril. I think you do need to acknowledge that the general public, generally speaking, is losing trust in journalism and ask why. And I think a big part of that is that the lines have bled, right? There's gray area now between what might be your standard kind of typical objective newscast, right? It's one that you want to trust. Like you're going to tune in. Remember back in the day, it's 6 o'clock, and you'd like tune into the news and get the stories of the day, and they report the facts, just the facts, ma'am, right? And then you've got cable news and Fox and CNN and everybody else. Like, are those simply objective presentations of facts? Of course they're not. If you go to CNN.com right now and compare it to Fox News and their website, you're going to see very different reporting on what happened in the Rose Garden.
Of course.
You're going to see very different coverage of Donald Trump's announcement and the tariffs and this global trade war that he's essentially initiating. And that's a fact. And so I understand why some people look at this and the way that algorithms factor into it as well, right? Your social media platforms are feeding you more of what you're reading along those ideological lines.
Well, that's
so you start to believe that that's the whole
literally
world.
what it does.
Right?
I mean, that's how it makes money. It shows you things you like, so you'll click more, so you'll stay on, so your eyes are glued to it. And I think everyone in a way knows that, but we all fall trapped to it. I'll open my X or my, Instagram and look in the morning, and I'll be scrolling a bit. I'll be like, oh, today's going to be a good day. And then I'm like, wait, or is the algorithm just telling me what I want to hear? So
Sure.
Dip into all those pools. I mean, I watch Fox News at home. I want to see what they're saying. I don't want to turn a blind eye to it. I hate when people say, well, I don't watch CBC or I don't watch X or X amount of whatever this news channel. Watch them all. Dip into every pool. Sure, you're going to have your favorites, but you have to see what people who don't agree with you are saying. Or otherwise, you're just like in a fog.
100%. My channel in our live chat makes a very good point. People are losing faith in Stuart Skinner. Also a very good point.
Jesus, what are we bringing this up
that's
for?
That's another institution. People are
Get
losing
outta
faith.
here.
That's another institution. How about this from one of our YouTube channel members? What's up, Cheryl outside? Great to see you. She says, can we please do a show with a panel of awesome people who've been fired? I love that idea. I think
they're
that's
on
a
our show every
fantastic
day.
idea.
I think. Like, what do you mean? I'm serious.
But you know what I love? What Cheryl's proposing, like people that got canned, that lost their jobs, that could have basically been plunged into a moment of crisis that killed the rest of their career and refused to let it do so. I love that idea.
I mean, I think everyone who's been fired, it's like it's just giving you more resilience to go out there and be successful. That's all it does. The pendulum swings one way, it swings the other. If you're in media broadcast, if your face is on reels every day, if your voice is on terrestrial radio, a podcast, no matter where, if you're writing for, if you're a scribe, oh God, I hate when they say that, but you know what I mean? And you're being challenged every day, you're going to get fired. Somebody is going to come up over you. You're going to eventually be tuned out, and you got to just pick yourself up and go again. Man, the first time I got canned from a radio gig, I was like, my life is over.
Yeah.
Look, dude,
Of
I was
course.
looking on LinkedIn or wherever, and I was going to, seriously, I'll tell you this, I was going to be a mailman because I'm like, hey, everyone will just wave
It's
at
a
you.
proud
It's
profession.
like,
Everybody loves the letter carrier.
And what did I do that? No. And now I ended up here, and it's the best job I've ever had. And you just got to follow that path.
We love you, buddy.
And to say that because you've been fired or somebody's disapproved of you or because you've been laid off, that means that there's a problem with your reporting or the content you're putting up. It's exactly the opposite. Maybe someone just doesn't like you and wants to get their voice to be louder than you, or maybe like CTV, they just don't want to deal with the blowback.
Yeah, 100%. I saw somebody say sheep never get fired. If you've never been fired, that's something to be proud of too. It's fine, but I just say don't judge people that have been. JJ, or rather it's Cheryl and Erica are kind of back and forth in conversation on the chat. They say, Cheryl makes a good point, says being a fact checker is kind of like being a judge, whereas being an activist is kind of like being a lawyer. You can't be both, or at least not with any fairness or decorum. I do recognize, and like I'm sure that Rachel, she essentially acknowledges it as well, like bringing Rachel Gilmore onto your national broadcast as a fact checker is a bold move in the sense that it's going to get a lot of attention, and the people that can't stand Rachel and that vociferously oppose her work are going to hate it. But the people that love her work or the people that appreciate her work are going to come watch your channel, maybe for the first time in a long time. And in particular, Gen Z and millennials that only know Rachel, and that's not an insult, that only know her from TikTok. Maybe when's the last time? They're probably going into their parents' digital cable guide and for the first time in forever.
She has a huge
because it's
base.
not Apple TV or it's not
Of course.
Netflix, and they're going to go find CTV every Friday and they're going to watch her segment. Well, now they're not.
Bunch of young people who watch her on TikTok and never read Substack and never see her on CTV. This is happening everywhere all the time. Thanks to Scott K, $25 super chat on YouTube.
Amazing,
and
Scott.
Idris, a new Real Deal member.
Oh, welcome, Idris. And I saw Les signing up but becoming a Real Talker as well in our YouTube memberships. This is a new option for you. The show will always be free, but a fun way for you to support the show and get some perks. We did announce exclusively in our Real Talk community chat. That's a perk for our Real Talkers, our Real VIPs. Our Real Dealers, our Real VIPs, and our Real Talk patrons.
And you're giving people scoops.
I made this scoop announcement yesterday when we confirmed Rachel Gilmore. Let them know we're gonna find cool ways to make that Real Talk community chat a perk that you appreciate every single day. Little scoops, little insights that you're not going to get anywhere else. LT in the live chat says, I agree with Jespo saying that's why and that's not why I'm reading it, says that's why I try to watch all news, even if I disagree and formulate my own opinion. MJ says, absolutely, we got to allow people to have their voices. This is Real Talk, encouraging folks to be kind. I really do think, and the show will not change, and we will not alter, and we will not waver from this path. You're going to, depending on how you're wired, if you're not hearing a voice on this show every once in a while that you can't stand, we're not doing our job. This is not can I tell you something?
Clearly our chat likes being fired up. We're trying to.
I'm going to share something with you guys. I'm gonna read a quick bit from our sponsors, and during that time, I will decide whether or not I should share this. How's that? That's Real Talk. All right. I want to let you know right now, our friends at Edmonton Opera are really excited about rolling out their 2025-26 season. Well, you're a DJ. You can do it smoothly. Watch this. You guys, can anybody else transition musically like Infamous just did? I don't think so. Edmonton Opera 2025-26. Some legacies passed down while others must be claimed. It's a season celebrating legacy, kicking off with Bravi. This is opera's greatest hits. This is going down October 9th and 11th at the Winspear Center in partnership with Edmonton's Symphony Orchestra. You do not want to miss this one, and the season opener promises to be sold out, so you're going to want to get your tickets today at edmontonopera.com. The season also includes, in February, the world premiere of Indians on Vacation. This is a new opera based on Thomas King's novel of the same name. It runs in February at the Northern Alberta Jubilee Auditorium, and Wagner's legendary Ring Cycle, the third chapter, Siegfried, Fate Forged in Fire, an epic tale of heroism and fate, will be performed at the McLab Theatre at the Citadel, beautiful space, at the end of May 2026. This will sell out. You can subscribe, learn more, get your tickets today at edmontonopera.com. UCAN Youth Services is doing incredible, and I reserve this phrase for when it actually fits, life-changing work through their relentless outreach as well as their Verto Road to Work projects. They've got two different projects, the Road to Work and the Verto Project, Verto Latin, by the way, for turnaround. If you know of a young adult, age 18 to 24, that is packed with potential, that you would do anything for, but it's tough for you to watch them as they struggle to either find or secure, keep employment. Maybe they struggle to find a positive peer group. Verto is a program through UCAN Youth Services in partnership with employers like IKEA, as an example. It's a 12-week paid quality employment opportunity placement after 8 weeks of in-house programming, a total of 20 weeks where lives are literally being launched into the next phase. The next program is starting soon. If you'd like to be put on the wait list or know somebody that should apply, you can find the registration form on their website. That's the Verto Project at ucan.ca. Complete Care Restoration, our only sponsor that hopes you never have to get in touch with them, but if your workplace or your home is impacted by a natural disaster or another unforeseen circumstance, this season it's sewer backups, burst pipes, and the like, make sure you remember the name Complete Care Restoration. They'll work directly with your insurance company to make sure you don't have that headache, and they've got more than 25 years of experience restoring your property and rebuilding peace of mind. I speak with enthusiasm about this team because they built our studio, and we have seen them in action. Nobody does it like the team at Complete Care Restoration. And John, a quick heads up for Real Talkers. We've got a couple of things happening on our April 4th episode. That'll be this Friday. Of course, we'll check in with our friends at Meredith, Bosenkohl, and Phillips.
Oh, nice.
Giving us the cross-political spectrum election week analysis. It's going to be Ken Bosenkohl and Shannon Phillips. And then we're presenting a special edition of the Real Talk Roundtable featuring the work of Innovative Canadians for Change. This is an organization that started right here in Alberta's capital city 15 years ago. This is an organization that all Canadians can be proud of. Using imagination as the foundation for innovation, they're taking the latest technology, they're taking some of the world's most skilled innovators, philanthropists, and they're impacting millions of people in some of the world's hardest hit, most developing nations. We're talking about in East Africa, in Asia, hospitals, community centers, agricultural applications, providing safe, affordable ventilators, access to oxygen labs, clean water, and more. It's all happening with the support of Innovative Canadians for Change. And on April 12th in Edmonton, they present their gala. You can join us there by getting your tickets today at ichange.ca. That's the letter I, the letter C, change.ca. Hope to see you April 12th at the Edmonton Convention Center. Yeah, so here's the deal. This is kind of an interesting situation. We get an email, kind of unsolicited, obviously, from the Walrus. And everybody knows the Walrus, obviously a big journalism outlet known globally.
Like the mammal?
Yeah, exactly. Those mammals, they're remarkable mammals, aren't they? But the Walrus is doing a piece on independent journalism across the country. You can check them out, by the way, online at thewalrus.ca. And so they ask us to participate. They say, like, we're watching what you're doing in Alberta, and we're intrigued by the model, and we'd be curious to hear more about, how you're building the audience and monetizing it and this type of thing. And so I sit down, and I'm like 30 minutes into the interview with this guy, and he goes, "I'm going to shoot straight with you." And I go, "Okay, what's up?" And he goes, "I've been assigned to do a feature on Canada's right-wing, conservative, independent media outlets." And he goes, "I'm getting the sense that label doesn't really fit." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like,
okay.
And he goes, "Yeah, you were like on our," he goes, "Real Talk, you're out of Alberta, you're out of Edmonton." He goes, "In Western Canada, nobody's really doing this." And he goes, "And so we had you on our list of conservative right-wing media outlets we were going to feature." And I said, "You had us on a list of like a right-wing media outlet?" He goes, "Yeah, Alberta and your conservatives on your show." And
great, get us on more of those.
And I go,
we want to be on all those lists.
And he goes, "But I'm not sure it fits to include you in this feature." And I'm kind of going, like, because I'm faced with a conundrum here. Because number one, describing us as a right-wing independent outlet obviously doesn't fit, nor does left-wing fit. But I wouldn't say right-wing. But at the same time, gosh, would it be cool to be featured at thewalrus.ca?
Of course, yeah.
So I'm sitting there kind of going, he goes, "Well, maybe we can cook up something else. Maybe we can work together down the line.
Okay.
And I said, I think that's a smarter trade-off.
Okay.
But I thought it was kind of funny for a fella that might have not been 100% familiar with what we were doing to have us on his list of right-wing independent outlets to talk to. Tracy's having a good laugh on this in the chat. I said, well, yeah, maybe we, the more I talked to him, the more he sort of realized how we roll and what we're all about.
Put us on the farthest. I want to be on all those email threads. I want to be invited to all those closed door, backdoor, Western Standard Rebel News meetings. I'll be in there with my little mustache and my glasses and the fake nose.
But we've talked about this, how this probably is the number one thing standing between us and millions of dollars. And that's the fact that we don't just pick a lane and roll with it, right? If you real talkers woke up one day and realized that we were just doing a hard pivot right or a hard pivot left, how many of you would stick around? Probably not many, because this audience wants to hear conversation and perspective across the political spectrum. Most of you anyway. But then we look at who's building the biggest audiences.
Well,
and
of course.
I mean, people have talked a lot in Canada this week about Ben Shapiro. People talk a lot about Joe Rogan. People talk, and they pick a lane, they double down on it, they stick to it, and quite
100%.
frankly, it pays.
Of course. But then you have to gear your whole life to that. And then my head would just explode. Like, I'm sure, we've talked about it. We could come out tomorrow with a conspiracy theory laden show that just had snarky headlines and just dug at stuff that we know is going to make people mad. But it's better, like, with positive reflections and bringing people real info and trying to make them feel good instead of bad all the time, even though I know we're reporting on all the bad all the time. I mean, plus, Brian, if we were millionaires, I like this. It keeps us humble. And look at our growth right now. Steady, not slow, steady growth. I mean, thank you. Oh, my God. Like, 2 years ago, we'd be happy with 8 new subscribers in a week. Now it's hundreds every week. Yeah. We are so thankful. And the memberships and now the community chat and just this building. If we had millions of dollars, there'd be days where the live just wouldn't go up. We'd be like, nah, not today.
Yeah. LT in our chat says, I consider Real Talk as somewhere in the middle. Says maybe a slight left lean, but definitely not leaning right. Greg loves that the walrus is trolling Real Talk. It kind of felt like that.
Was that a diss?
I don't think because I was not familiar with him, and he was obviously not familiar with me. And but it was just kind of like, it was funny because it was revealed through the interview what the real editorial focus was going to be. And I think he just realized that maybe we were not the show that he was looking for, right? So, but this is, and I love this as well from Zaboya in the chat, who says, yeah, heaven forbid you consider both sides' opinion, right? Like, it's what we want. As long as it's not like, did the Holocaust happen or not? We do want to hear both sides. Both sides is used now as a pejorative, like almost as like, oh, Buddy goes, oh, look at Mr. Both Sides, right? Because what was it? It was Charlottesville. It was when Donald Trump basically said, there are good people on both sides. And everybody went, well, in a situation like this, when you're talking about white supremacy, when you're talking, remember the tiki torch kind of phase? And he says, when you're talking, you got to pick a side there. Rachel Gilmore kind of touched on this in our interview. That's what we're going to make our short on today. We know that already. But I do think, like, bigger picture, the two words together, both sides, is not a negative. And there are more than one side to a story. And your personal experience may not permit a different opinion on a certain thing, but that doesn't mean others don't hold different opinions. And we want to understand why people land where they land and understand why other people feel differently than we do. I think it's a pretty simple formula. I saw it in action as a young kid every Sunday around my grandparents' table, the lunch table, where there were, and I honestly think, John, like at 9 and 10 years old, without realizing it, I was being unintentionally conditioned to become a talk show host, because my grandpa would hold court basically around that lunch table and hear from people that saw things differently. Mm-hmm. My grandpa would bring his Jewish best friend to our family Christmas dinners,
awesome.
and ask him to talk to us about the tradition of Hanukkah. And we would sit there and then, like, that was like, it might seem like a small thing, but for a lot of people, that's not a small thing.
Not at all.
And that's like just one tiny small example, but I saw that in action growing up with our family, and I always appreciated it. Tony's wondering in the chat if I felt insulted. I did not feel insulted.
We're not the droids you're looking for.
We are not the...
Also, all these buzzwords you're talking about, like both sides and woke and biased and extreme left or right. Like, we should probably get a thing that flashes on the screen when you or me or our guests say this, because you're right. Like, they have negative and positive impact, but they're just buzzwords now. And that's all. Like, I was reading I'm not going to say where I was reading whatever article, but I felt like taking a fucking highlighter ride and just going over, woke, extreme, bias, both sides.
Yeah.
It's like somebody put those 10 words into AI and said, write me an article on this subject. Put these 10 words in it. I don't like any of them, really.
Donna says, I listen and chat on Real Talk because the show is balanced. Says, please do keep up the same format. Ken says, if you were to swing hard left or hard right, you would lose credibility with the audience. Totally, you guys, 100%, of course.
Well, you couldn't hide that. And I see people doing it all the time where they were giving people content and then there's a shift and I'm like, okay. And it works for people. I'm not like, hey, you want to get rich? You want to have a comfortable life? Sure. But I mean, you're going to take a hit to your stress level, to your morals. I mean, all these things, right? So.
Yeah. JJ says, don't change, guys. I mean, all this stuff, guys, we're kidding. Like, I've kind of been on the record with how, I mean, breakfast television, when I hosted that show for 6 or 7 years, there was never any script. We didn't read off teleprompters. We shot from the hip. 6:30 Chet, obviously I was who I was, and here I am who I am. So I am who I am, said the great Popeye. But I'm not like, no, the show's not going to change. It's a hypothetical exercise. We're kind of messing around. But we do appreciate, who was it? I was just reading the comment. You said that, yeah, like Alberta, you hear from the left, you hear from the right. That's the province, and that's the audience that we serve. And I believe that that's the country too. And so, listen, I just want to, I've always believed, and I've always wanted this from friends and loved ones and the general public, for people to form their own opinions based on solid information, right? And based on what you believe to be best, the best decision, the best policy, not just what your religion, in other words, your political party or the leader of your political party has conditioned you to believe or has given you in the form of marching orders. And I think right now, we're seeing this more than ever, we're seeing, tweets and posts from people all over the place that are basically saying that when Donald Trump's, when all of this really hits the fan, look at this, for example, journalist Daniel Hannan, here's one example. Johnny, I have 100 windows open on my computer, but look at this tweet right here. He tweets yesterday, when the Trump presidency ends in its ignominy, a lot of the people now cheerleading him will deny ever having backed it. This is short term right now. We're looking at the impact on the markets. We're obviously seeing what's happening with the economy. We're better understanding what this will do to the American relationship with Canada and with the rest of the world. But how many people that are right now going to the wall backing Trump's tariffs and backing the policies actually deep down inside believe that it's the right policy for the United States and that it's actually going to make life more affordable for Americans? I think in their dark hours, when they're lying in bed at night staring up at the ceiling, they know.
It's a gamble.
They know that it's a bad idea.
It's a gamble. And how many people who voted for Trump were also people who bashed Biden about the economy, about the market, and now are seeing the market and the economic impacts before yesterday's announcements? We saw it. And now today, people were just frothing at the mouth to wait to see the markets open. And what did we see? Percentage drops in everything. I mean, so and I'll go back to what you just said. Don't be afraid to change your opinion. If you liked Trump before and tariffs, and now you think it's fucking ridiculous, don't be afraid to find good information, listen to both sides, and change your opinion. I mean, Joe Rogan used to be a liberal. Go back to his early shows when he had people on who he always has people on he agrees with. But I mean, having people on who were clearly left-leaning and liberal, and now he's changed to more right-leaning. That's fine. Do whatever you want. But don't be afraid to make that change. You don't have to solidify yourself in a trench for your entire life.
People evolve too, right? I remember my buddy's dad, Donnie, used to say to me, If you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're old, you have no brain. You've heard that before too, right? How about this from Mashif Sharon? Sharon, awesome to see you as a YouTube member. Thanks for your support. She says, I listen to the right-leaning guests just like I listen to the left-leaning guests. I really appreciate the real talk. What about this from M. Black in our chat? Says, I'm from New Brunswick, and the reason I subscribe is because my daughter lives in Alberta, and I like that I get something normal from there. I actually wonder if M. Black may have given us our new billboard. Something normal from Alberta.
We have so many billboards we want to do. Heard it first on Real Talk.
The only thing that we're missing is the
Jespo.
budget. We're just missing the budget. Something normal from Alberta.
We don't want to be back to back with all those legacy media.
Yeah. Hey, how about we have another Rand Paul clip? I
of
played the one
today.
earlier,
Yeah,
but so here's a Republican that stuck his neck out there along with three others. Mentioned it earlier. Mitch McConnell, another one of them. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski siding with Democrats and voting for that resolution, which passed. It'll ultimately prove to be nothing, but still, it's a statement. Rand Paul, the Republican, sticking his neck out on so-called Liberation Day, and here's what we're talking about. Like when you see something on your team, when you see something on your side that stinks, it takes guts to call it out, and that's what he did.
But on the tariffs in particular, on the idea of trade is proportional to wealth. The last 70 years of international trade has been an exponential curve upwards, and the last 70 years of prosperity has been upwards also. We are richer because of trade with Canada, and so is Canada. Whenever you trade with somebody, when an individual buys somebody else's product, it's mutually beneficial or you wouldn't buy it. If the trade is voluntary, it's always beneficial. There is no Canada versus the U.S. The consumer wins when the price is the lowest price.
So that's Rand Paul out of Kentucky. And, obviously being called out by Republicans. And but at the same time, like at the end of the day, when history judges, it'll look back and when the economy is where it is, wherever it's going to be, and we can only speculate now, and we'll bring on expert voices, and we always want you to have the best information. But at the end of the day, and including in the midterms, which aren't actually that far away, Donald Trump and the entire administration will be judged on proof of performance. We want to know what you think about all of this as we wrap. Want to remind you that talk@ryanjesperson.com is the inbox you can hit up with your bigger, longer thoughts. We got an amazing submission by Real Talker Brendan, who's a CEO in wealth management. He says a parable why Canada will win the trade war. Maybe we'll find some time for that one, Brendan. We sure appreciate it. You can also leave a comment on our YouTube episodes. Tell your friends about it. Share the content if you think they'd benefit from conversations like the ones we're having. We're going to talk to a conservative and a liberal out of the gates tomorrow. That's our April 4th episode, and then a celebration of innovative Canadians for change. We hope you'll join us.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Kandola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.